Hi, everybody, and welcome to Thursdays at the Museum. I'm Amanda Harrison with the Detroit Institute of Arts, and we are so excited for today's discussion on the DIA's special exhibition, Detroit Style, Car Design in the Motor City from 1950 to 2020. During the program, we will be taking your questions as always. To ask a question, sign into your Gmail account through YouTube and leave a public comment. Or if you're watching from Facebook, you can comment right on our Facebook page. This week, that public comment section is going to be especially important because we are including a trivia question at the very end of the program. So please pay special attention to try and get that trivia question correct and win a very special prize that our docents will tell you more about later on. And today we are joined by our trained docents, Cindy Patrick and Jim O'Malley. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Well, go ahead and take it away, you guys.
Thanks, Amanda. Today's presentation is titled Detroit Style, Car Design in the Motor City from 1950 to 2020, as you can see. And it picks up directly where the 1985 DIA exhibit of the same name left off. That exhibit covered the period of 1924 through 1950. Today, we will be discussing the past 70 years of automotive design, including Detroit's visionary stylists such as Harley Earl at General Motors and others who shaped our love for cars through their designs, impacted our everyday experiences with automobiles. This exhibit is really the story of Detroit. It is a celebration of an art form pioneered in Metro Detroit. It is a homegrown story about the artists, designers, model makers, factory workers, and so many others who in one way or another tie us together economically and culturally to what we proudly call the Motor City. I hope after today's presentation, you will have a greater appreciation for the designer's hand and the skill, process, and significance of the Detroit design studios over the past 70 years. The cars being shown today are a reflection of the post-World War II automobile industry. After the war, there was a new awareness on the part of the automobile industry of the importance of consumers and their very fickle and rapidly changing buying habits. Automakers, to be successful, had to compete against one another by offering vehicles that the American buyer wanted to own and drive. The beauty of automobile design and the offering of modern-day innovations grew in importance as the automobile manufacturers competed for the consumer's dollars, striving to create a car that would not only fulfill the buyer's needs, but their fantasies. We'll explore how designers balance the tension between fantasy and reality to create cars that would appeal to our imaginations while still serving a practical function. Concept cars played an essential and important role as auto designers created vehicles that they hoped would connect with consumers' ever-changing appetite for wanting the latest and greatest in design. It really hasn't changed. Even today, that's what the average consumer wants. So how does the process work? How does a car evolve from an idea to the finished product driving down the road? Today, we will be showing you the highlights of the design process from concept drawings to clay model making to a fully produced concept car to a finally mass-produced automobile. It all begins with a concept, which is just an idea. For example, one of the cars I'll be talking about later, called the Firebird 3, which debuted in 1958, began as a concept. Harley Earl, who was the head designer at General Motors, told his designers to create a car that an astronaut would drive to the launch pad before taking off into space. I'm going to say that again. He told his designers to create a car that an astronaut would drive to the launch pad before taking off into space. I don't know if I would like to have been on his design team, but the designers, they started brainstorming by creating sketches. These drawings were done very quickly in Prismacolor markers, gouache paint, crayon, tape, and brush. They would create drawings of their ideas, hang them up, and review them as a team. They would then collaborate and take elements from the different designs to make one final car. For example, they would take the headlights from one car and maybe the hood design from another designer's sketches. The sketches would continue to evolve from rough ideas to the finished concept. When these sketches were created, they were not considered fine art, though they were kept under lock and key so they would not fall into the hands of competitors. As a result, most concept drawings did not survive, even though they produced hundreds of them. So once the concept design is complete, the cars were drawn to full scale in 2D. They would then place special drafting tape or string stretched over the engineering drawings. The tape allows the designers to edit proportions and ergonomics and details such as window shapes and the hood length. In the picture on the right, you see David McIntosh stretching tape into a smooth curved line, which requires great skill. I don't think I could take tape and bend it into the curving of a window, which if another designer that was watching at the time could say to Dave, why don't you move it a little bit this way or that way to finalize and get the finished product? This style of design is no longer used in the United States, but is still used in European car design. So once the concept utilizing full-size drawings was complete, a clay model was made. Just as an architect constructs a model of their design, clay models became important because it translated a 2D drawing into a full-size 3D model of the vehicle. The clay models would weigh 3 to 4 tons. They were massive in weight, and they would often weigh or become heavier than the actual car themselves, since the cars would use lighter and more aerodynamic materials. The clay models could be made completely from clay, though most times there was a skeleton or framework underneath made of wood or aluminum. The clay models were painted and completed in such great detail that they tricked the viewer's eye, who believed that they were looking at a fully operational, manufactured car that could be driven off the stage, such as at an auto show. Utilizing the clay model, die casts were then made, which are the castings used to make the actual parts on the production line. It is in the automotive factories where the thousands of people who work on the production line turn the concept drawings into reality. And I encourage you to come down to the DIA to see the exhibit. And if you do, please stop by and see our beautiful fresco titled Detroit Industry. It's located in Rivera Court, which was named after the artist Diego Rivera. And it's a powerful tribute to Detroit's manufacturing process and the auto workers. Today, the big three, comprising of Ford, General Motors, and Fiat Chrysler, have around a dozen plants operating in Michigan. Each of these companies have production facilities located throughout the world, bringing not only the utility, but the beauty and design of the automobile to even the most remote parts of the world. At this point, I'm going to stop and ask Christine if there's any questions. Christine?
No questions so far. You got quite a few hellos and excited folks watching. We last checked, we have probably about 90 people. So welcome everybody. We're glad to see you today.
Okay. All right. So let's get to the cars. Our first car is a 1951 General Motors LeSabre. Cindy, can you tell us a little bit about it?
I sure can, but before I do that, I want to mention that we have a new addition to our Thursday at the Museum team. Jim O'Malley and his wife welcomed a new grandchild just this past week. So it kind of fit in nicely with Jim and my hiatus from TATM for a couple of weeks. So congratulations, Jim.
Thank you for mentioning it. I'm glad that it's a wonderful addition to our family. Thank you.
So this is one of the 12 cars that are in the exhibition. And it was originally created in clay. And then it was actually produced as a one-off, which is called a prototype. General Motors referred to this car as a laboratory on wheels. So you can see it's really got some radical design elements included here. And this was a time in history when we were, it was post-World War II, but we were also kind of entering into a phase called the Cold War. And you know, the United States and what was then Russia were, you know, really building up their armaments, their sky power. And so people's minds were on that. They were seeing it in the newspaper. And so sometimes those type of design elements would then become reflected in automotive design. And that's what we see here. So we have this beautiful General Motors LeSabre. This car is gigantic. If you have a chance to go to the museum, take a look at it. You won't believe how big it is. I don't know how you could ever parallel park it, really. It's just huge. But if you look at the nose of the car, you can see there's a circle. And that sort of represents the nose cone of a jet. And then the way the hood line kind of barrels down from there, those are almost wing-like shapes that kind of represent maybe the wings of the airplane or jet, and that's also mirrored in the bumper. If you can see, the bumper also swoops down. Toward the back, the tail fins mirror what a fighter jet's tail would look like. So this is definitely all about cues from airplanes, fighter jets, spaceships. And it, as I said, it reflects the thinking of the time. But this particular car really, they gave designers the opportunity they didn't have to worry about any practical concerns. They could be as radical, ambitious, and you can see they explored like some really wild possibilities here. So we talked about the fact that this was referencing the geopolitical climate and the idea of aeronautical armaments. The color of this car is a sky blue metallic, and it must have 100 coats of lacquer on top of it. The depth of the paint on this car is unbelievable. And the sky blue, at least when I saw it, it really made me think about the fact that not only was it designed to look like an airplane, but it reflected the color of the sky. More about this LeSabre is that this one prototype car was created as a personal car for Harley Earl, who Jim mentioned earlier. And he was the head of design at GM at the time. And I just like to think about him driving this car from Grosse Pointe to Detroit, a car that no one had ever seen before. You can see it's got chrome everywhere. Even the dashboard and the steering wheel had chrome on it. So as he was going down maybe Woodward on a sunny day, this car was super bling. Can you go to the next slide, please, Kimmy? So now here's some more background on the LeSabre. So if you take a look at the image on the left, you can see that this is from an article that was in Life magazine at the time, and it's commenting and applauding the U.S. Sabre fighting jets that were being produced, and that's what the LeSabre was named for. These F-86 fighter jets were actually produced to go up against the Russian MiGs. The design was probably inspired by images of this plane that people were seeing in the news and print materials like Life magazine. The clay model that you see to the right, that's actually completely made of clay, would have been produced prior to that first prototype car. So that was what they had to use to advertise this idea in Life magazine. So the clay model was produced, the chrome parts were added, and a beautiful paint job, kind of a golden tone, was put on it. So I don't think you can get a stronger connection design connection than, these jets and the geopolitical atmosphere and what the car designers were trying to produce. Now, when I went to look at this car, I was really curious about the front end because I didn't see any headlights. So I did a little bit more research, and I found that if you'll go back in that front circle there, that's where the headlight rested, and the headlight would move in the direction that the driver was steering the car. I just wondered as I was looking at it, I wonder how well that illuminated the roadway in front of that driver. Probably not so great. Beyond that, I want to mention that the car was designed at a building in Detroit called the Argonaut Building, and that was where GM had their design center. It was built in 1928. Kimmy, you can go ahead and move forward if you want. It was designed in 1928 by Albert Kahn, who designed many of the buildings in Detroit. And it was given to the College for Creative Studies here in Detroit. And it's now used as a think tank. The Shinola Manufacturing and Lab resides there, as well as the Henry Ford Academy. So I think it's kind of a little interesting point in history that it was their design lab and it continues to be a think tank. Okay, moving on to our beautiful Chrysler 300C. So this came under the genre of the forward look, and the Chrysler designer, head of design, was a man named Virgil Exner, and everyone called him X. He was also called the father of the tail fins, and I think you can see why. So not only were we looking to the skies, now we were also looking to speedboats with their angular proportions. And so this was a term that was it was invented by Chrysler, but then it was adopted by all of the big three to describe this new major design trend. It has this very expressive exterior. It's huge. Again, really from the front to the back, it's really a long car. It was designed for middle-class families who had middle-class families who had, a lot of kids, and they would be able to fit them all in this nice big car. You'll see that it actually does have exposed headlights and beautiful white walls. And then, Kimmy, if you could look to the rear of the car, there's a piece of chrome that kind of runs between that tail. This is the beginning of something called the belt line. And I'm sure Jim and I will be getting to that again on some of the other cars that we're talking about. But it was kind of a cue as to where the person would actually be sitting in their seat, and it refers to the driver's belt line, where that resides on the car. It went through a series of different experimental tests in terms of, you can see it's kind of aeronautically styled. So X, or the father of the tail fins, decided to put it in the wind tunnel. And before he did that, he had his designers attach hundreds of pieces of yarn. So one end of them was stuck to the car and the other end could fly free. And while it was in the wind tunnel, they actually studied the drag on the car. And they were trying to decide if, in fact, this design made it more efficient and practical in terms of the car's performance in windy situations. That actually was not proven to be so. So such things as drag, points of actually pointed to the inefficiency of the form. He also wanted to make it visible that the tail fins would be helpful for highway driving. I'm not sure why. I guess so that others could see you, because these giant tail fins and the big taillights on the back would make you very visible. But this Chrysler 300C ended up being one of the most successful of all of the forward-looking cars. Another designer from GM, Chuck Gordon, spied on and did espionage on the design work of the father of the tail fins, Virgil Exner, and that was how they were able to start designing in the same manner. And they actually were able to start bringing this forward look to the road at the same time that the Chrysler cars hit the road. And the people at Chrysler were astounded by this. But things like that do happen, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the secretiveness of design as we move on in this presentation. Christine, do we have any questions?
We don't have any specific questions about that piece, but we do have a shout out from Jennifer. And she said her father, Stan Parker, was part of Harley Earl's team. So welcome, Jennifer.
Oh, that's great. Great to hear. If we could move to the next slide, we're going to take a look at a couple of Chrysler concept drawings. We won't spend a lot of time on these. Within the exhibition, I think there are 36 different renderings or concept drawings of all of the different cars. And you can see that Dave Cummings' drawing on the left pretty much looks like the car that actually went into production. And if you look at the car that's on the right, the drawing by Cliff Voss, he was allowed to just run loose with the design. And although it was super radical, some of those design elements were actually adopted into the car that went into production. So, you know, sometimes these renderings or designs were pretty freestyle, but they did generate ideas that could be adapted and put into production. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm going to be talking about this car, which is a 1958 General Motors Firebird 3. It is the largest car in the exhibition, and I believe the most far-out futuristic concept when it came to automobile design. It is one of the most experimental cars made in Detroit. And though it debuted in 1958, it still wows people today. This vehicle takes its aspirations not like the Buick LeSabre from the fighter jets and from the sky, but this goes beyond that to outer space and the space travel. This vehicle is one of Harley Earl's final concept or show cars introduced by GM during his tenure. As I mentioned earlier, he asked a team of designers to create a car that an astronaut would drive to the launch pad before taking off into outer space. The design team included Norman James, who would go on to design the lunar lander, which did make it to outer space. And the interiors were designed in part by female designer Jerry Cavanaugh. Plaster and clay models were made and wind efficiency tests were done on the car, just as Cindy spoke about with the Chrysler 300C. With the space race looming, the car clearly looks like a spaceship with its giant tail fins on the top, sides, and rear of the vehicle. A double bubble top where the driver and passenger would sit, and the insignia all add to its spaceship appearance. The car was created at the start of the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Firebird 3 made its debut as a futuristic space-age machine at the Motorama at the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom in New York City in 1959. Almost 1 year to the day after the Soviet Union launched the satellite Sputnik 1. The Firebird 3 incorporated aerodynamic styling and the latest technologies such as in turbine engines. There was an excitement on the part of the American consumer for these new radical ideas being brought from the sky of what the future may bring. This excitement resulted in the Firebird 3 being advertised as a laboratory on wheels. It was a chance to test out or create something not that consumers could buy or drive within the next few months or years, but in the many years and decades to come by utilizing the most advanced technologies available at the time. These technologies, such as an autonomous driving vehicle, is only today becoming part of our daily lives. The autonomous driving technology on the Firebird 3 could only be used on a test track. A radio transmitter was embedded into the road so the car could navigate around the track. It was driven with a mono controller, meaning there is no brake or gas pedals or even a steering wheel in the car. There is only a single joystick, which is located between the driver and the passenger, that would be pushed forward to go and pulled back to brake. The bold, radical, and futuristic ideas that are illustrated in our next slide are by Sidney J. Mead of a gyroscopically stabilized two-wheel car. Isn't this a great piece of futuristic art? In particular, I like the futuristic setting of the car. It's parked on a patio with a cocktail party going on in the background, giving the perception of how wonderful the future will be. The car was never manufactured, since it is based on a very advanced gyroscope technology. A gyroscope is a wheel device that can rotate in any direction while maintaining its absolute direction. Again, the ideas of flight and futuristic fantasy are the themes being used here to spur the imagination of the consumer and to reinforce the idea that the automobile companies are on the cutting edge of technology, engineering, and design. These ideas are again demonstrated on our next slide. The artwork on your left was commissioned by Eero Saarinen, who, as the architect overseeing the construction of his radical design, he was the designer and the architect of the General GM Tech Center. And it was with the intent of being placed, this painting was commissioned to be put in the General Motors Research Division. This work, created in 1955 by the American modernist and photographer Charles Sheeler, who painted in a precisionist style by utilizing very direct, linear, and simplified forms. In this way, he was able to capture the spaces, materials, and shapes of the modern and industrial way of American life. The painting is dominated by the sweeping suspended staircase in the GM Tech Center that is shown on the left, which Saarinen had designed. The object in the bottom right of the painting is a mechanical heart, which was developed by research scientists at General Motors in collaboration with doctors at Harper Hospital in Detroit. The new mechanical heart was a life-saving technology that kept a heart working during surgery. It looked like a Cadillac V12 engine. Again, these futuristic technologies were all being developed by the automobile industry, such as General Motors, and were done to improve and transform one's everyday life at the time. Christine, any questions?
Jim, there's a couple of comments.
Yeah.
Some of the viewers are noting how these concept cars really got woven into even cartoons, like the George Jetson and the Jetsons, for those of you who remember that popular cartoon. And then also how the Batmobile was inspired by these concept cars. And the viewer said specifically the Ford Futura concept car. So we have some really observant viewers here. Thank you.
And we have more futuristic cars to come. Wait for the Ford Probe 4. Our next vehicle is a Corvette Stingray, which Cindy's going to be talking about. Cindy, did you ever own a Stingray, or anyone in your family own a Corvette?
Well, I came from an automotive family. My dad worked for automotive companies, and a couple of my brothers did. I had 3 older brothers, and my husband also worked for automotive, and I love cars. And with 3 older brothers, I can tell you we had a lot of Corvettes come in and out of our driveway over the years. When I look at this one, I just think to myself, be still my beating heart. It's my favorite. It's such a beautiful, sleek, it kind of has that Italian design look to it. It's really quite a departure from the cars that we've been looking at that were, so big and had, so much chrome on them. This is really kind of stripped down, and it's really just all about sort of this almost like a speeding bullet type of a design. So you can see it says 1959. So that gives us the background of when this car was being designed. We're at the cusp of a new decade, the 1960s. And as we were saying, we were talking about post-World War II and the Cold War. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what was happening in the world around this time, which was, the Berlin Wall went up. in 61. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 62. There were nuclear tests going on. But at the same time, there was a little bit of an upswing in diplomacy in 1959. And that was when Khrushchev visited the US and stayed for 2 weeks. So there was a little bit of hopefulness that maybe we were going to come out of the other end of this Cold War. So, we were talking about the cars from the 50s that were being created for the most part for middle-class families. Now the designers are looking toward the baby boom generation, and they're creating cars that are rebellious, youthful, which is the taste of this new generation that's coming of age. This car was painted bright red and was used in the filming of the movie Clam Bake in 1967, which starred Elvis Presley. So that was a great marketing effort and continued to tap into the interest of this new young generation. The car in this exhibit was an early concept that was created for Bill Mitchell, and he was number 2 at Chrysler, number 2 to Harley Earl, the head designer. And it was designed in secret at the GM Tech Center. And, we were talking about espionage between automotive companies. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. Guess what? This was designed in secret from all the rest of GM. The rest of the company couldn't even know about it. So in the background, you can see it's called the styling. At the time, it was called the styling dome, and it was a styling division for GM. And as Jim said, it was designed by the Finnish architect Eero Saarinen. In the front of that, in the foreground, you can see the earlier model of the Corvette, which had more rounded features. It's got that side kind of air scoop. And then we have the new model for 1959-60, which is, pretty much a radical departure, about the same size, but a really different kind of body style. So why was it designed? Why would it have to be designed in a secret little one-car garage-sized studio where no one could see it, no one could know what was happening? Well, during this time, there was an industry-wide ban on car racing, and the elements in supporting motorsport events had been kind of put into a hiatus because there had been many high-profile deadly crashes, one of them being the Le Mans 24-hour race in France, where a car flipped, went up into the grandstand, and killed 82 spectators and a driver. So auto companies across the board more or less agreed not to make anything resembling a race car. However, Studio X was created by GM, and the studio was placed in a building, in a room that was really too boring for anybody to notice. It was actually used prior to that as a storeroom for clay modelers' tools. That's how unimportant this room was. So Mitchell set up this garage-sized space. He hired young people who had gotten their start in the auto industry as car racers to be the designers. And they started to work on new machines, and they wanted to capture this radical new speed energy. So the car was debuted as a Stingray, not a Corvette, not a GM vehicle, because of the non-racing agreement. It was considered Bill Mitchell's project and not the project of GM. So the design inspired the shape of Corvettes going on into the future. Do we have any questions, Christine?
Not at this time, Cindy. We're good.
Okay, back to Jim.
For the first of all ages, including adventurous young people and families. This work by the artist Edward Roche came about during a road trip he took along Route 66 from Los Angeles to his home in Oklahoma City. On the trip, he took a series of photographs of gas stations, which included a photograph of this station, which he took in Amarillo, Texas. Kimmy, can you go to the next slide? This image was included in a book of photographs he published called 26 Gasoline Stations. That photograph provided the model for the painting in our exhibition, along with a screen print that is part of the DIA's collection. In this piece, Roche is concerned about how American culture is becoming mass or homogenized. You see the same gas station everywhere. Though this painting spurs the imagination about the idea of the open road and of travel, it also expresses concern about the standardization of our country and how every city was beginning to look the same. And of course, Standard Oil has the word standard in it. So the American landscape is becoming standardized through commercialism. In this piece, Rouchet is expressing concern by reacting to the idea of a standardized mass culture, of which the automobile industry played a role. And he was concerned about how it has began to permeate all aspects of our lives, this commercial standardization and homogenization. It was a work that expressed concerns about the advancements that was occurring and the technologies and the standardization that was occurring throughout all of our country at the same time. Christine, are there any questions?
Just a comment that really fun information, and the viewer is mentioning Byron is having a good time. So thanks, Byron.
Wonderful. Our next group of cars were produced by General Motors during the 1960s. Cindy, would you like to tell us about it?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So here we have two renderings, and by renderings, that's a word that we use for drawings. These might be watercolor drawings. They could be airbrushed. There are 36 of these drawings throughout the exhibition, and some of them go beyond just being a study for a car and are actually beautiful works of art. So on the left, you see the proposed 1967 Cadillac Eldorado. And, you know, over at Chrysler, we're making this cute little Corvette Stingray. And at GM, we're still, you know, hanging on to these really big, lengthy cars. But notice this rendering of the Cadillac. All of the chrome is pretty much gone. The forms have become, instead of curvy, they've become very angular. The fins are abbreviated, and it kind of is reflecting more the mechanical logic of what the styling will do with the efficiency of this vehicle. Some of the terms that are used for all the details that are added to a car are badging, jewelry. So for instance, where it might say Toronado, where that badge is put on, you know, in the earlier years, that would be a pretty glitzy, blingy badge. Now it's a very small kind of nondescript. And in terms of jewelry and chrome, you can see it's so much more simplified. To the right, we have the Pontiac Catalina. So this is on the far right, we have the real futuristic design. And, you know, we talked about this where the designers were given free rein to come up with, you know, any kind of ideas that might pop into their head. And then it became refined into the car that we see on the left, which was the 61 Pontiac Catalina. So it's a futuristic design, but it's next to the more simplified angular form. But some of the details that end up on the production car are actually, you know, the ideation of it starts with these really radical type designs. So the designer Bill Porter referred to it as a monocoque form, and mono meaning one, and then the French word coque, which means shell. So it's one shell. It means the exterior body panels and the internal frame are constructed together. This is a big change in automobile manufacturing. Prior to this, cars all sat on a frame. And as Jim said, in the Rivera Court murals on the south wall, we actually can see the assembly line, and we can see the workers adding, you know, the drive shaft and adding the axles to the frame. So now we have this departure where the exoskeleton or the body becomes the frame. And you can see on the left, that's, you know, the type of frame that a car used to sit on. And now designers are starting to create the body parts as the frame. So this reduced cost, it reduced weight. It was really a good move in the right direction. So it was a move from the conventional construction that all of the automakers were used to. And they had done the body on frame method. And now we are moving to what was later called unibody construction. If you'll advance one, please, Kimmy. On the top, you see General Motors Oldsmobile Toronado, and on the bottom, you see an airbrush rendering of this beautiful car. And again, you can see the absence of chrome. You can see the absence of the badging and jewelry. No more big white walls on the wheels. So really, the form of the car is what becomes the most important. And you can see it's very sleek. You can see the belt line is actually stamped into the metal body parts, and it goes from the rear of the car. Kimmy, if you could point that out, from the rear bumper all the way across to the front. Something else happened with this Toronado that was a new engineering kind of marvel, and that is it was the reintroduction of front-wheel drive. Now, front-wheel drive had been experimented with around 1929, 1930. And the first American front-wheel drive car was the Cord. I think it was called the L29, 29 for 1929. But then because that car didn't really perform so well, it was sort of underpowered. It would have problems with vapor lock, and it would slip out of gear. It was abandoned. So now here we are, 36, 37 years later, and the reintroduction of front-wheel drive. Again, this now they get it right, and front-wheel drive cars and four-wheel drive cars are really the norm. So here we in the concept drawing that's below, it's called the red drawing, and I wish that you could see it in person, because when you're walking through this gallery, this car like jumps off the wall at you. This rendering, because that background is such a brilliant airbrushed red. And you can see that it's almost exactly the same as the production car. However, he stretched it out to make it look a little bit more dramatic, but most of the styling cues have remained the same. Kimmy, I'm sorry, Christine, do we have any questions about, let's see, the Eldorado, the Catalina, or the Toronado?
No, just our general comments that the viewers are having a great time listening.
And so are we. We learned so much doing this this talk and going to the exhibition. It's really new for us. Usually we're talking about paintings and sculptures, and not an actual commercial, moving, living being. I did want to mention one of the videos that you can find on DIA.org. I was curious about how they got the vehicles into the museum and into the gallery. And
it's a mystery.
Yeah, so if you go on to DIA.org, there's a short video, and they actually brought them in big semis up to the loading dock, brought them in, but they were physically moved by people from place to place. I think they did have floor jacks that allowed for a little bit easier movement, but none of these cars were started. They had to be moved down the hallways, put in place, backed up, moved around. So it required, a whole team of expert car handlers and, our art handlers to do this. So, if you have a chance, take a look at that video. I thought it was really interesting. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Cindy. Speaking of fun, this is, for me, the Ford Mustang is a fun car. My parents bought the Ford Mustang the first year it came out, the white, the original, the first year, and I remember it so well. And when I graduated from college, the first brand new car I ever bought was also a Ford Mustang. So the Mustang has a special place in my heart. Cindy, do you have any special memories or anything about Mustangs?
I sure do. My father bought a 64.5 Mustang right when they came out, and so did one of my brothers. And my brother actually had the one that looked just like this. It was a fastback, and it was in British racing green. When I turned 16, for reasons that are beyond my wildest imagination, my dad gave me that Mustang. And it had a 289 engine in it, which was way too much power for a 16-year-old girl to be driving. But what I wanted to mention was one of the very first places that I went once I actually had my own wheels was I jumped on I-94. I'd never driven on a freeway before, so I was pretty nervous, but I drove down to the DIA. So, way back then, even at 16, I was really thirsty for art. And so that's my Mustang story.
Thanks, Cindy. So I remember mine, the one I bought, was silver with red racing stripes and wire wheels. I remember it was such a fun car. But during the 60s, the refinement of the automobile industry continued. during the later 60s and early 70s. So much so that many of the cars created during this time, for a lot of people, such as Cindy and myself, still define the attitude and energy of the American automobile. I'm referring about the pony and muscle cars created by the big three that have become the global icons of automotive design. The genre pony car takes its name from the Ford Mustang, which was introduced, as Cindy mentioned, in March 1964 and continues to be produced today. Ours in the exhibit is a 67 Mustang in a gleaming shade of black. The Mustang's design proportions, utilizing a long hood and short rear deck, forces one's eyes to focus our attention on the front of the car. So let's take a look. The snarling front grille with the galloping and wild Mustang in its center and the roaring high horsepower engine under the hood is meant to conjure fantasies of freedom in the open road and this raw racing energy that is easily attainable for you, the consumer. And at the time, it was at a very reasonable price. The Mustang revolutionized the market when it was introduced by appealing to a younger middle-class buyer who wanted a youthful, sporty car at a modest price, which would allow them to live out their fantasies of freedom and the allure of the open road. The Mustang became wildly popular around the country. Ford's auto designers, as a result of this, were then faced with a new dilemma of having to continually update the car to keep it fresh and new without losing its identifiable features and proportions. So in the gallery, you see the 1967 Mustang that you see here alongside our next slide of two drawings from the Ford Motor Car Company Design Studio. On the left is a concept drawing by Howard Payne, and on the right, a concept drawing by William Schenck, each experimenting with subtle variations of its form. Looking at the actual car to the drawings, you begin to get an appreciation for how what may be considered minor modifications can have such an impact on the attitude, character, and energy of the car. The car's broad appeal and success was driven home with the movie Bullitt, which I assume all of you remember or have seen. And it's where Steve McQueen is driving his 1968 Mustang, and he's seen chasing a Dodge Charger through the streets and hills of San Francisco, blasting past slower, tamer cars such as a puttering Volkswagen. This was such a great statement of raw speed, energy, and a rebellious attitude that appealed to some drivers. At the same time, all of you probably remember watching the Mary Tyler Moore TV show, when at the beginning of each episode, Mary is seen driving into Minneapolis to start her new career, thereby offering a different type of freedom and independence, especially to young women. These two very different energies and attitudes that the new Ford Mustang was able to offer to different buyers in the 60s and 70s was one of the reasons for its overwhelming success. Competitors were very quick to introduce products that would appeal to the same youthful buyer, and in the exhibit, we have another beautiful pony car, the 1970 Plymouth Barracuda. This car shared with the Mustang the similar design proportions of the long hood with aggressive grille and short rear deck. Though this car takes on many of the design features used in race car designs, such as the shaker hood with the as you can see, for the air induction, which made it look like the engine was like flaring nostrils, racing stripes, and hood latch pins from cars found on the racetrack. I especially like the sawtooth chrome molding running between the wheels underneath the door and tapered grille, all to add to its muscular presence as it would rumble down the road. Next to the Barracuda there are also two great concept drawings, so typical of how the auto designers created new concepts. The first, by Milton Antonek, is a 1967 rare form sketch for clay development. Drawings like these, as I mentioned, were done by the hundreds. In this case, the sketch was made to assist the clay model makers as a suggested refinement. The work on the right is of a 1971 front-end facelift by Donald Hood, which demonstrates the racing qualities and mechanical force of the car. Again, both drawings depict the auto designer's ongoing effort to keep the car new and fresh without changing its fundamental character and appeal. So as a former Mustang owner, regrettably, the heyday of the pony and muscle cars quickly came to an end. But we are first going to look at an automotive sculpture automotive inspired sculpture. Cindy, do you want to talk about this piece? And I love the name of it, by the way.
So the title of this is Kuwazi, and it's done by the sculptor John Chamberlain. It's part of the DIA's permanent collection, Jim. And it comes from the earlier part of John's career and is considered one of the most significant early works by him. I think it's so fitting that this aggressive, kind of muscular, snarling looking sculpture, which is pretty large, and you can see is made from cast off sheet metal and body parts from cars. It's fitting that it's in the muscle car gallery with the CUDA and with the other fast cars. So the title is improvisational. He named all of his sculptures with kind of, I guess we call it the poetry of language. We might not understand it, but apparently, he did. He was an abstract expressionist artist, sculptor. So why shouldn't he name his works of art in an abstract way? You can see that it's made out of flat metal that's been bent and folded back into each other. It's contorted. As we said, the material is found material. He wanted to use everyday material of American life. And he wanted to elevate these cast off parts, pieces of cars that were neglected, rusted, bent, and transform them with his artist's touch. Some folks wonder if this is meant to resemble a car crash, and he said absolutely not. He wanted it to just be an abstract composition. And, this was at a time when artists, the materials kind of drove the type of artwork that they were creating. We had people like Jackson Pollock doing drip paintings, and we had people who were The Bay by Helen Frankenthal. The method became, and the material became more important sometimes, and was the thing that drove the composition of the artwork. And so that's what we see with Kuwazi. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Cindy. The beloved heydays of the pony and muscle cars during the late 1960s and early 70s quickly came to an end due to the economic, political, and cultural backdrop of America during the mid-70s and early 80s, propelled by fuel and oil shortages. The oil or energy crisis would create new challenges for the automobile industry and once again radically reshape car design. A new approach to design was needed that focused on creating cars that were based on aerodynamic efficiency that would go further and faster using less fuel due to the gas shortages and increasing gas prices at the pump. In addition, consumers began to demand cars with a larger, roomier interior within a smaller, more efficient body frame. No small task for automotive designers. And by the way, because of the energy crisis, they wanted those cars now. The 1983 Ford Probe in our exhibit is one of the most radical and futuristic of the 1980 cars designed in Detroit. This concept car had no resemblance to the production of the Ford Probe that was eventually mass-produced and sold in the late 1980s. This car was revolutionary in many respects, not only for its futuristic appearance, but it was also the first car at Ford that was designed on a computer. and its appearance and body shape lends itself to what we think of today as a futuristic computer-generated form straight out of a science fiction movie. When it was tested in a wind tunnel, all of the futuristic features that we think of today, such as the covers over the wheels, the front wheels, the back wheels, the fixed windows, and the sleek unified fiberglass body with minimal ornamentation, made it an aerodynamic success. It had a coefficient for drag of 0.152, which for us lay people means that when the car got up to speed, say on the highway, it could maintain that speed using the amount of gas used by a push lawnmower. The coefficient of 0.152 was so remarkable, the number was painted on the front and rear bumpers, thereby emphasizing the feat the Ford engineers had been able to achieve. That is, by designing a car that made a huge leap in solving the problem of the day, or that of making a car which used significantly less gas. The Ford Probe 4 was considered a radical experiment in aerodynamic efficiency, so much so that when it debuted, the media called it Ford's wind-cheating supercar. The design features found on the Ford Probe 4 were quickly incorporated in future cars as the smooth proportions and aerodynamic styling. Examples would be, for example, the highly successful Ford Taurus. At the same time, similar experiments occurring at General Motors and at Chrysler. Take, for example, our next car, the 1987 Chrysler Lamborghini Portofino. That's quite a name for this car. This car began as a speculative design for the Chrysler Navajo by designer Kevin Verdun and was rebranded as a Lamborghini, which Chrysler had recently purchased. This car was only possible due to the collaboration of the engineering prowess of Lamborghini and the radical aerodynamic styling by Verdun. Though this car looks very mundane and ordinary by today's standards, and to me looks a lot like a Dodge Intrepid. And I want to point out that is exactly why the design of this car is so important, since it does look like a Dodge Intrepid or a Dodge Neon. It influenced car design at Chrysler and at other automotive manufacturers throughout the 1990s. The car was designed from the inside out, which was a radical design departure and introduced a new vocabulary of cab forward design, which was used to maximize interior space by moving the interior cabin forward on the body of the car. The design feature of moving the cabin closer to the engine and shortening the proportion of the front end looked very different at the time, especially when compared to the design of the pony and muscle cars. The design was also unique since the doors were mounted on hinges and opened like a bat wing. As you can see, the car no longer looks very boring or ordinary by looking at this picture. The importance of creating a roomier, more comfortable interior space, as you see here, came about when designers realized that consumers were spending more and more time in their cars, often commuting long distances, and needed a car that offered a comfortable interior space that would not only envelop them, but keep them safe, all while still offering high fuel efficiency. Christine, any questions?
We do have a few comments in regard to the Mustangs that you were talking about. Quite a few people were super excited to see the Mustangs, and they're very glad that Ford is still producing them. And then we also have some questions about rewatching this program. And I would just like to let everybody know it is recorded. It is on the museum's YouTube page. You can use the same link that you used to get onto the program today, and you can rewatch it at your leisure. You can see the link on the screen right now.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn things back to Cindy. Cindy, you're up.
Okay, folks, it looks like we've come pretty much to the end of our hour with you. So I will let you gaze upon this beautiful Chrysler Kronos. as we wrap up, I do just want to mention that, again, one of those beautiful paint jobs with, I don't even know how many coats of lacquer. And when I looked at this car, it made me think of like a sea green or looking out at one of the Great Lakes. Please, if you've got time, go to the DIA and see these cars in person. They're just fabulous. So thank you all for joining us today. The designs that we've seen pave the way for future vehicles that continue to be, of course, forward-thinking, safer, and made with the user's needs in mind, even considering the needs of female drivers today. And so we're looking from the 1950s through to today. The future holds more to come, including an upcoming auto show, Motor Bella, which will be this summer, and then the North American Auto Show, which will return in 2022. The DIA is open. We invite you to plan your visit by reserving a timed entry ticket via the DIA website. Our hours are Wednesday through Friday, 9 to 4, Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 5. And our current exhibitions include Russ Marshall, Detroit Photographs through June 27th, along with Detroit Style, Robert Blackburn and Modern American Printmaking through September 5th, Expression and Experience through October 3rd, and upcoming in just about 2 weeks is the 84th Annual Detroit Public Schools Exhibition, which will run from April 23rd through May 30th. Next Thursday, please join us at 1 o'clock when Thursdays at the Museum presents Nature's Nation, American Landscapes of the 19th Century. Now, before we sign off, I just want to show you this absolutely fabulous book about the exhibition, and it's got that fantastic Firebird on the front. And we have a trivia question that Jim is going to ask you, and the winner will receive a copy of this book. So thanks for sticking with us.
Okay. And the trivia question is, and the beautiful book Cindy just showed you will be given to the first responder. So and the trivia question is, how many cars are in the exhibit? It's a very simple question. How many cars are in the exhibition? So there we go. Cindy?
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday.